Good afternoon, everyone. Apologies for the couple minutes late start today. Just had a brief technical difficulty that we were working out. Just want to say thank you, everyone, for joining today's session of our out-of-home office hours. We're excited, and as I mentioned in the last session, we're really excited to get these sessions kicked off again and excited to get back on a regular cadence for all of these out-of-home office hours. And again, thank you for joining this one. And today we're going to be focusing on the foundations of media measurement. This is perennially one of our most attended webinars. It's a session that we like to do periodically because we know there are a lot of new people in the industry all the time, and even for those of us that have been in the industry a while, this is a great refresher and something that we need. I know I need it. I know every time we do it, it's a great refresher and a reminder for myself. So thank you for joining, and as always, I'm joined by Brian Schopper today, as well as Brian Rue, who's a special guest with us today. Brian, many of you may know, he is the Senior Transit Manager here at Geopath, and I like to think of Brian as one of our kind of resident media math experts. I know whenever I have a question, I go to him and ask for questions. So I'm grateful that I was able to convince him to join us today. In all honesty, I told him there was only going to be one other person on the call, so maybe I lied a little bit, but I'm glad he's here anyway. So anyway, I'm just kidding. But thank you, Brian, both Brians, for joining today and being part of this session. What we're going to cover today, and just before I jump into this agenda, a few housekeeping things I want to make sure we are covering off on. So if you do, as always, we want to make these sessions as useful and as helpful as possible to everybody on the call. So please feel free to ask questions, throw in questions in the Q&A widget. That's the easiest place. I will be checking, we will all be checking the chat, but it's definitely easier to see questions in the Q&A if that's easier for everybody. So what we're going to cover today, as I was mentioning early on, key media math topics. So things like, what do we mean by the term universe? You may hear that term thrown around. So what does it really mean? And what are impressions? We talk about this as kind of a key definition of media consumption, but what does that really mean? How do you calculate GRPs, TRPs, and also talking a little bit and giving everybody a general sense of what is reach and frequency, and then moving into audience composition. So some really good topics here, and I think worthwhile topics for everybody to cover. And like I said, periodically, we're going to be continuing to do this type of session and similar sessions throughout the year. And without further ado, I do want to hand it off, and Brian will jump in and cover each of the different sections, and I'll also jump in with certain sections as well. So I'm going to ask Brian Brian Schopper to jump in, and there's also some videos that we're going to be playing today. So if there's any trouble hearing them, please just shoot me a note in the question or even in the chat. Just want to make sure everybody can hear the videos as good as they can. So anyway, I'll stop talking now and I'll hand it off to Brian, who's going to talk about universe.
Sure, sounds good. Thanks, Scott.
Yep.
Is this one a video, or is this?
Nope. So
okay.
This one is the only one that doesn't have a video.
Okay, got it. So at the core of Geopath measurement and media measurement in general, one of the sort of most basic building blocks of that is just getting an understanding of universe. And put really simply, universe is just the population of the group that you're looking at. And it changes depending on if you are looking at a specific demographic or in a specific area, but universe is a function of a specific population within a specific area. So since we're talking about geographies and areas, and again, this is sort of a foundations thing. So some of these terms that you hear today, these might be things that you've heard before, or maybe several times, but I just want to go through and talk a little bit about some of the different geographies that you see when dealing with the Insight Suite and Geopath measurement in general. So a lot of times you'll see markets referred to as in their DMA size or as a CBSA. And these are They're similar, but they vary in sort of size and kind of composition. So a DMA is a designated market area. There are 210 of them, and this was something that was set up by Nielsen for their broadcast purposes. Generally speaking, you can think of a DMA as a broadcast market. For something like the New York City or the New York DMA, for example, generally the DMA will include a lot of areas outside of the major metro area. So for using the New York one as an example, it includes all of New York City, basically the entire upper half of New Jersey, up even into Connecticut a little ways. So it's a pretty sprawling area. And again, that has to do with generally speaking, the broadcast market. But it is something that we use in out of home quite a bit. Next to that, you'll see we also have CBSAs that we utilize quite often. And those are core-based statistical areas. And they are smaller than DMAs. There are over 900 of them across the country. And they are kind of major, there's like metropolitan and micropolitan kind of designations to them, but basically they're just smaller market areas than DMAs. And you can kind of think of those as more so the commuter market, the sort of business market rather than the broadcast market. And there are additional geographies that we get into with our measurement and with just kind of measurement in general. You can use counties for setting your media market. You can also make combinations of several DMAs or several CBSAs, or for that matter, you can combine a handful of counties together to make a more custom market. But the universe of your campaign and the universe of the people that you're dealing with are always based around whatever market designation you have. So here's just kind of a quick little side-by-side looking at the Atlanta DMA and CBSA. There are just 35 panels run across 4 weeks here. And we'll get into things like reach a little bit later, but this is just kind of showing, again, so this is at the 18 plus audience level here. Again, the DMA is much larger. And as a result of that, generally speaking, you get larger population numbers. You can see in that middle line there comparing the DMA and the CBSA. However, when we're looking for things like reach, usually when you have a smaller market size, it's easier to reach a larger percent of that market. And you can see, even though the DMA is larger here, we're reaching 10% more of this audience target with the CBSA designation. So just something to consider when thinking about your universe of people within a market. And so I was saying earlier as well, not only is the universe a function of the geography, but it's also a function of the demographics that you're using. So if I am looking at something like, 18 plus in this specific DMA, then my universe is only those that are 18 plus who live within that DMA. If I'm looking even more granularly than that, like a combination of age and income and ethnicity, my universe base gets smaller and smaller the more specific I get. Still looking at that same market level, but because of the demographics that I've applied and I've kind of narrowed my search in a little bit, I'm now looking at a much smaller universe base. So this isn't something that, like, the concept of universe, you don't really use it too much day to day in the metrics or anything like that, but it's just really important to keep in your mind when you're thinking about, who is the available group of people that I can reach in any one place for any target. I saw we had a question in here.
Yeah, and it's actually, I just want to maybe go back to, it's kind of related to this slide. So asking why the CBSA, why is that reach percent higher than in the DMA? And I think we're starting to talk about that. And essentially it's, because you have the smaller area, the smaller population size, just the ability to reach that group, you're able to more easily reach a higher percent. And maybe saying more easily, as I just did, maybe that's not the best term, because again, it is dependent on the inventory you're using and where the geographically, it is located. But essentially what we're saying is, again, if you reach the same number of people, if it's the same set of units and you're reaching that same number of people, because that group of people that you've reached is in a pool that is smaller in total population in the CBSA than the DMA, your percents are going to be higher in the CBSA because that same pool of people that was reached is just in a different size universe, so to speak. So it takes up more of that pool of the universe.
Right. And even looking geographically, like I'm not sure off the top of my head the size comparison between the Atlanta DMA and CBSA, but like I was saying earlier, the DMA is usually sprawled out further beyond the major metro area, so than compared to the CBSA. So it is in a lot of cases easier to reach the group that you're trying to reach in a more concentrated area, as opposed to having them more spread out over a big market area. So that's, and again, we'll get into reach and frequency later, so I think that'll make a little bit more sense, but it's all sort of a function of the availability of the people in the area that you're looking at, or the existence of the people in that area.
Cool.
And so this is kind of just reiterating that point that I've been making. So the combination of both audience and geography affect the overall universe that you have for your campaign.
And one other thing too that I want to just make sure, and I'm going to go back one more slide. Apologies for bopping around too much on the deck so far, but also too, beyond just some of these basic demographics that you often have the ability, and especially again within the Insight Suite as well too, but also other tools. And I know advertisers often also want to reach behavioral targets as well. So that is another thing that you have the ability to do and want to have as part of your consideration set as well. But just more of a point of that I just want to make sure everybody's aware of that than anything like that. So moving on, talking about a similar example, I think, with the Atlanta populations.
Yeah, so again, this is just kind of further reiterating the point of the combination of audience and market determines what your overall universe size is. So kind of looking at the first column here, adults 18 plus in the DMA, you can see we've got about 5.2 million people who meet that criteria that live in that DMA. When moving over to the CBSA size, we are, it's about 900,000-ish, about 900,000 fewer people, again, of the same audience demographic, but just because of the size difference of the market you're looking in, there are about 900,000 other people who aren't part of that universe when just changing the DMA to CBSA. And then going one step further now, making our demographic even more narrow. So not just 18 plus, but capping it out 18 to 49, you can see there's still a pretty significant difference, about 500,000 or so between the DMA and CBSA, just in existing population. And so this is kind of a good illustration of that point. Like if you are trying to reach persons 18 plus in one of these markets, or in this market, you'll have an easier time getting a higher percentage with the smaller number of population, basically. And again, just some kind of things to reiterate. So the universe is the total collective group of people who are within your geographic area and also share a demographic. And it could be even something as wide as 0 plus. So it could be all, total persons. And so it's just important to pay attention to what you need for your campaign, what kind of audience you need, how many different universes you can consider. There's just a lot of things to keep in mind when considering both market and demographics and how that'll affect the amount of people you can reach.
So next we'll talk about impressions, and we have a short video to show.
The basic definition of impressions is a gross count of advertising exposures. That means each time an ad is viewed, that generates an impression. The concept is that one person can produce more than one impression as each view is counted, whether the ad is being seen for the first or the 10th time by the same person. So although an ad achieves 100 impressions, that doesn't mean it's seen by 100 people. It has duplication, so it could only be reaching a few people multiple times. Impressions are an important metric and are the foundational currency of most media, as they can be compared and added across channels. Because impressions include duplication, they can be added if the universe space, both demographically and geographically, is consistent. You can add impressions across different media types, time period, and out-of-home inventory formats, which ties back to it being the basic unit of media measurement. The basic definition of
Okay. So yeah, just a couple things to reiterate and go into with a little bit more detail. So as the video is saying, impressions are the basic building block of media measurement across a lot of channels, but specifically for us within out of home, that's what our sort of core currency metric is impressions. And you are able to add them across different campaigns or, different things like that, as long as you are looking at the same universe base. So if you have, two separate campaigns against 18 plus that are running in Chicago, maybe even one is out of home and one is, TV or some other medium, you're able to add impressions up across channels and also within out of home. So if I have two separate campaigns running in the same market against the same audience, I can add up those impressions because they do include duplication. And I want to actually touch on that point as well. Scott, can you go, what's on the next slide?
I believe it's just a summary.
Oh, okay. Well, this is fine. So an impression, again, is any single time that an ad is viewed, that a board, a billboard, a campaign, or whatever it is, anytime that basically a set of eyeballs reach that ad, that counts as an impression. So for example, if I were, walking a loop around a block and I see the same ad 3 times on my walk, that's 3 impressions. Even though they all come from me, it's still a gross count of exposures. So every single time the ad is exposed to an audience, that counts as an impression. And again, at the bottom here, it's not a unique number of people who are seeing because it does include duplication.
And I also wanted to reiterate the point you brought up, Brian, too, about, and it's also brought up in the video, this idea of, being able to add up impressions across channels, right? So if there's a campaign that's using different channels, including out of home, that's ultimately what kind of advertisers want to do a lot, right? But the really thing that's really important to make sure is that the demographic and that the geography are the same. Otherwise, it's not comparing apples to apples and it's not additive. So that is really important. And that's how we're tying the idea of universe, is why that's an important thing to know and understand where your universe is. So as you're doing this and as you're looking maybe across channels, or even to another point that was made, maybe comparing past campaigns to, or different campaigns to each other, you need to make sure that that core is the same, that geography and demographic are the same, so that you can start to compare these.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And for that matter, actually, it doesn't even necessarily need to be an entire campaign. Say you're looking at, 2 boards that were run against the same universe base, again, geographically and demographically, you can add up impressions across, multiple different media. So like, if you had 1 poster and 1 bulletin, you can add those impressions together as long as they had that same universe base. So it's really handy for being able to understand sort of total impressions of a group of units as long as they're of the same universe.
Right. Cool. So next we're going to talk about GRPs, and there's another short video that we'll play, and then Brian Rue, I believe, will talk more about.
Out of all the media terms in advertising measurement, GRPs and TRPs can be the easiest to misunderstand. But don't worry, they are a simple calculation based on impressions and universe base. And after watching this video, you will be a whiz at calculating them. GRPs and TRPs are a way to quantify the number of exposures, which are impressions, as a gross percentage of a specific population. Using GRPs makes it easier to plan and buy any media. It is a metric planners and advertisers use to compare media within and across channels and markets. It's a simple formula that takes the universe impressions and divides it by the universe population. For example, if we have 12 million impressions with a population of 8 million adult 18 plus population, that would equate to 150 GRPs. And 150 GRPs are 150% of the universe base. So what does that mean? GRPs and TRPs can be greater than 100% And that's because just like impressions, GRPs and TRPs account for duplication of exposures. Just like impressions, GRPs and TRPs can be added across out-of-home formats as well as other media, as long as the universe base is the same. This allows clients to compare and evaluate the media weight of a campaign in a standardized way.
Great.
Yeah, so we have gross rating points and target rating points. These are GRPs or TRPs, as you may have heard. And these, maybe you've seen them used interchangeably, but gross rating points measure all persons 0+, while target rating points measure a specific demographic. So gross rating points could be considered the full capability of a board, whereas you would use target rating points or TRPs for that specific target. For example, 18 to 49 adults. Before we go to the next slide, I don't know, did we have a question?
They want to review, the person wants us to review the calculation slide, and we actually have something like that coming up. So
yes, okay, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yes.
One thing I do want to bring up, Brian, too, like from your perspective as well, like I feel like the industry is moving away from the term GRP and kind of referring to TRP for just about everything. And I think just want to make sure everybody's aware that this term, you may hear the term GRP, but essentially that's what it's referring to. But most often I feel like people use the term TRP.
Right. In the past, we only had the ability to have, an overall universe number for 0+. I mean, today we're lucky to have so many demographics data breakdowns to be able to have target rating points for all of our variables.
Great.
And this is just the equation for calculating TRPs and GRPs. So it's if we took 15 million impressions and then divided it by the population of the universe of 10 million, we would get 1.5. And then multiplied by 100 gives us that 150 GRPs. And this is an equation. So if you had the GRPs and you had a population of a market, you can get to, okay, well, yeah, it would equate to this many impressions. So just, it is an equation that you can use, but Geopath will always have those impressions, populations, and GRP on hand as well.
So Brian, there's a question about, which I think is an interesting one. Is there a max rating number for TRPs or GRPs? So can you ever max out? The way I'm interpreting it is that, is there a max for TRPs or GRPs?
Not necessarily. It's
right.
It's just based on how many impressions there are. Right. So there's no specific limit to impressions within a market. So not necessarily.
And another question, just going back to the impressions, which I think is interesting. It looks like Brian Schopper's typing an answer to that person now. But so to confirm, if someone is walking back and forth in front of a screen, does that count as multiple impressions? And yes, so you may, and that's where you start to play into reach and frequency, right? You maybe reach that person counts as one towards overall reach, but the frequency of them engaging with that unit is going up. So, but it does count as multiple, that counts multiple times as multiple impressions.
Right, and that's similar as well to something like an online ad, as in addition to that, like if you were to view the same ad on a web page several times, that would count as multiple impressions as well. So it's kind of similar in principle to that.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So in this slide, we have two markets, Salt Lake City and New York. And we're looking at the adult 18 to 49 population. Of course, New York will have a larger population at 9.5 million. But let's take an example of an equal number of TRPs. We're looking to find how many impressions would we need. I'm sorry, what would the number of impressions would that be to get an equal number of TRPs?
And before I skip ahead, Brian, quick
Yes.
question, like what would be a reason for somebody to, like, what do TRPs do for somebody? Like, what's the benefit of talking about things in terms of a TRP?
Yes, so it really just allows somebody to normalize the impact of a campaign on two different markets. So, you can understand 200 TRPs in Salt Lake City versus New York, it will be a different number of impressions, but it would be a similar impact, so to say. So yeah, just numerically, it would be that impact would be in Salt Lake City would be 2.9 million impressions, where in New York, it would be 19.2 million impressions. Those are both 200 TRPs.
And I think one of I always like this example. I think for me, what it does really convey, it's just like, because the markets are such different size, to have that same impact within that market, it's very different, right? To have the same impact in Salt Lake as you want to as in New York, it requires a different amount of impressions, which ultimately probably leads into a different amount of inventory that you're using and so forth. So I always think that's a really interesting point. I also want to go back to one of the kind of questions about is there a max TRP? And I want to make sure we weren't kind of overstating it in a way and just make sure it was clear. And I think it is tied to, and I think Brian did say this before he left the slide, it's tied to the maximum amount of impressions, right, in your overall population. So it is based in the kind of the math and the equation that we're using, but it's typically we don't reach that ultimate limit when you're creating campaigns and out of home. Again, Brian, would you say that's fair to say, in response to that question about max TRPs?
Yeah, there's no hard ceiling.
I mean, it is driven by the maximum amount of the impressions derived from the inventory that you're looking at, right? Or the inventory available in that market. There's a ceiling in that way, right?
Right. But if you added another unit, those would be additional impressions and additional TRPs, though.
I hope that helps, and I hope we're not confusing things with that. So just want to, and if there are, feel free to put more questions in the chat or the Q&A. Which just a few things to remember.
Yes, impressions and GRPs are related. How are they related? Impressions are the number of times an ad has been exposed to the universe, whereas GRPs and TRPs are the impressions expressed as percent of that universe. And just to tie it together, the universe is that population being measured.
Cool. Awesome. So now reach and frequency, and this is, I know, a key thing. Again, if you're a lot of times with when we're doing campaigns or plans in out of home, you definitely need reach and frequency is often a goal, as well as TRPs and as well as impressions. So want to make sure we're all aware of that. And again, we have a short video to explain some of that, and then we'll walk through the example again in real time.
In the impression and GRP videos, we discussed how those metrics reflect exposure to a campaign, whether as a gross count defined as impressions, or as a gross percentage of a population defined as GRPs. These metrics have duplicated views in their calculations and provide a measure of tonnage and media weight. When an advertiser wants to know how many different people will see an advertisement and how often, the metrics used are reach and frequency. Reach measures how many different people will see an advertisement. It counts each person only once, no matter how many times they see a unit during the reported period. Therefore, total reach can never be more than 100%. Frequency measures the average number of times the target audience will see the advertisement in a specific time period. Let's break it down with an example. Say there's a universe of 10 people. 7 out of 10 saw the ad, therefore the reach is 70%. The frequency or number of times they see the ad varies by person, depending on their travel patterns around the market. Reach and frequency are very helpful measures of campaign performance. These two basic measurements are a terrific way to quantitatively explain what a campaign delivers for both local and national advertisers.
Okay. Yeah, so as Scott said, let's go through that example a little bit slower, just kind of explain it a little bit more thoroughly. So again, reach and frequency are really helpful metrics when evaluating how a campaign is done, and just how effective it was in reaching, how wide into the market and how sort of deep it reached into that market, so to speak. And you'll see what I mean in a second. So let's say for this example here, we have a universe of 10 people. They all, these 10 people live in whatever our area is. They are demographically the people that we want to reach. So throughout the course of our campaign here, only 7 of these 10 people saw the ad. Doesn't matter how many times, just only 7 of these people saw the ad at all. So 3 of these people don't count towards the reach. And so this campaign has a reach of 70%. Now, if we start to look at frequency, this counts the number of times that these different people saw the ad. So back to the question we had earlier, if someone is walking back and forth on the street, like say they forgot something and they went back to their apartment, back to the, back and forth, and they passed by an ad 3 or 4 times, that would be counted as frequency. So each time that person saw an ad would be counted as an additional count of frequency for that. And so when you're looking at frequency for the purpose of the entire campaign, you average it out across these 10 people. So even though not everyone saw it, the average frequency for the campaign, if I'm looking at this, it's probably like 3.5. But that's kind of how we, generally speaking, how we get to the reach and frequency metrics. So just want to pause for a second, see if anybody has questions on that. Scott, we can always hop to the next slide as well, and I can keep going.
Right. And there are times too where you may need or be asked like, oh, I want to know the percent of people that have seen the advertisement 3 or more times. So again, that relative reach is also something that may be asked for as well. And again, ultimately in some of the Geopath tools, you can do that as well.
So we got a question kind of asking about, just ideal frequency numbers. It's a little tough when, and this kind of speaks to how Geopath sits in the industry, like making kind of recommendations like that is a little bit tough, but unfortunately the answer is it depends. And that's kind of what this slide will get into as well. But it basically depends on what you need for that campaign. Like what are the goals of that campaign? What are the needs of the campaign itself? So, and I'll kind of readdress that question once I go through this slide, but depending on what your campaign calls for, you could optimize for reach or frequency just in the way that you sort of compile the packages of inventory. So something like a bulletin, for example, on a highway, like a big billboard sized bulletin, that generally speaking is better at reaching far. It's beneficial for a campaign to have a bulletin like that if they are trying to get a high reach, because it is generally on, a high throughway or a high traffic throughway where people pass by to all areas of the market. Also, it's a very large bulletin, so it's easy to see from a lot of places. So something like that is more geared towards optimized reach. Something that's more of a smaller unit, say like a transit shelter or a bus bench or anything like that, that's kind of a small like kiosk size. Things like that are generally really useful for increasing frequency within a campaign, because they are not necessarily as high impact and visible, but they get the same people over and over sort of on a close-up basis. And again, going back to the concept of, optimizing reach or frequency, again, it all depends on what you are trying to do with the campaign. So just kind of using some of the examples here, say something like a really, really well-recognized national brand, they're not really trying to, reinforce any sort of branding or messaging over and over again. For a campaign like that, where the intent is have as many people as possible see this, that would be something you try to optimize frequency. Again, if you are like an established brand, maybe even something like seasonal, just something to get your message out as wide into the market as you can. But something where you might optimize frequency, if it's like a crowded competitive landscape and there are a lot of competitors, you're maybe a new brand and you need to kind of reinforce the same messaging over and over again. Or if it's something that is like a common purchase that happens a lot, something that has high frequency, like again, like a transit shelter or a bench or something like that. It's really useful for reaching the same group of people repeatedly, and you can kind of more efficiently hammer home that same message over and over again. Again, it completely depends on what you're trying to do with the campaign, but so going back to that question, it's hard to sort of give like a prescriptive answer like that on sort of what's a good frequency for out of home. Again, it really depends. Like, Scott, sorry, were you going to say something?
Yeah, and just to jump in a little bit, but definitely, client goals drive some of this stuff, oftentimes, but I think, I saw in the question, that in radio it was anything over 3, and I think 3 is generally I know when I was in school, it was like they had the 3-hit theory, they called it, marketing to have an impact, right? So somebody has to see it 3 times. So I think there are some general rules of thumb, and I think that is definitely one of them. But I think the idea that it's the right question too, right? It's not just because sometimes I think when we're planning goals, we're focusing on reach, but it's reach and frequency. And if your client or whoever you're working with can have a sense of both, because as this seesaw shows, one impacts the other, right? As one goes up, the other goes down, typically, or for the same TRP level. Sorry, so you got to have a fixed point. But so it is important to think of both at times as well. So, so that is the question is a good one in that sense as well, right? What is that optimal? And again, general rule of thumb, I think at times, for, as I said, just to caveat, it is probably dependent on client needs, but also, as a general marketing rule, I think the 3 times is kind of held as maybe a standard across different industries.
Different Scott, there were actually a couple of questions I wanted to address before we went forward.
Okay.
So one of them was just a quick question on this previous slide about, the optimized reach and frequency one.
Go back.
Yep, this one here. Oh, we can start here. There was one on this one as well. So someone asked about, so there's 7 people, I guess they counted. So they saw the ad, this group of people saw the ad 36 times or whatever the amount is here. It's probably just, so they're asking, would you just divide the number to come up with the frequency? Yes, but of the full population. So here, well, I guess of full universe. So here it would be the amount of times it was seen divided by these 10 people, even though some of these people didn't see it at all, it's still the average for the entire universe. And then the next one was just a question on the right side here, like what would you categorize as like a low involvement purchase? And that would really be anything that's, not like a major purchase. So like anything that's, I don't know, like a consumer.
Toothpaste, right?
Say it again?
Maybe toothpaste, things like that.
Yeah, like
maybe that's an extreme example for out of home, but yeah. Yeah,
like a maybe even like a fast food chain, like if they have, lunch specials or something that's not financially a large purchase, but like something that would be a campaign trying to optimize reach, maybe like Chevrolet or something has a new truck or something like that. They're trying to really get the word out there and get it spread as far as possible. Usually that's, again, like an infrequent purchase. People only buy a new car, everything it's every 10 or 11 years is kind of the average. So for something like that, you wouldn't really want to reinforce the messaging as much as you would something that people might buy more often over and over again.
Cool.
And so this just kind of, there are a few different ways that you can calculate reach and frequency and GRPs, they're all interrelated with each other. Ultimately, GRPs and TRPs can be found by multiplying reach and frequency against each other. So, excuse me, was there an example for this one, or is this like number wise there? I don't think there is actually.
No, it's just showing the relationships, like kind of the algebraic relationships between
Right.
frequency and TRP. So if you have,
Right, and if you
have two out of the three, you can figure out the other one.
Right, and similarly, actually, if you go back to the previous slide, I just want to show the sort of seesaw, so to speak, of reach and frequency. When you're setting them against a TRP level, reach and frequency work in an inverse relationship of each other. So if a campaign has a high reach, generally it has a lower frequency. But if you have a campaign, and say that campaign has a 200 TRP, you can also have a campaign that has 200 TRPs, but has very high frequency and kind of a low reach. And it's all, again, about what you're trying to optimize and balance for, but they work in an inverse relationship with each other. So as frequency goes up, reach goes down, and vice versa. Again, all within the same GRP TRP level. But it's just something to consider. Usually if you have a campaign that's got a high reach, it may have a low frequency, and vice versa.
Again, keeping the TRP level the same.
Exactly. Yep.
Cool. So sorry, I know I
Yeah,
kept
no, that's
looking
okay.
at this slide accidentally.
So just a couple things to reiterate. Once again, reach is how many different people have seen the advertisement. Reach itself is expressed as a percentage. You might notice, like within the insights data, we also have a metric called reach net, which is the different number of people reached. But reach, when you see it in terms of like reach and frequency, reach is always a percentage of the audience that you're trying to reach. So it can't be added in the same way that impressions can be added, or GRPs, TRPs for that matter. And then frequency is the average number of times that ad was seen throughout the campaign length, and also by the full universe of people. So again, it's possible that not everyone saw the ad, but certain people may have seen it way more than other people, and that all averages out to an average frequency for the entire campaign.
Thank you. Okay. So next, talking more about audience and composition. And we have another short video, and this will be the last section. And we'll...
Another way to use ratings to evaluate any media's ability to target an audience is to consider percent composition. Composition expresses the percent of a unit's impressions that are made up of a particular audience. Think of it as a pie chart with slices representing different unique audiences. It can be based on any demographic profile available in the Geopath database. Let's look at how it's calculated using an impression-based example. The target audience impressions are divided by the base of the total audience impressions. Composition gives us a measure of audience concentration on a location-by-location basis. If a location, for example, has 7,791,000 total adult 18+ impressions, of which 2,161,000 of those impressions are against adults age 18 to 49 with a household income of 75,000 or more, we get a 27.7% composition. What does that mean? 27.7% of this location's total impressions are against this defined audience. Locations that have a high composition of a target audience means that there is a much higher likelihood of the advertiser's message getting in front of the right audience.
Okay, so this is showing six boards, and the one that stands out immediately is P30, and because it has 471,000 target out-of-home impressions, and that's it's the strongest in terms of in volume. But there might be more to the story if we look at P20 and P50. So P20 actually has the highest target percent comp. So 66% of the impressions are for your target demographic. And so P50 is also 62%. And so, yeah, more than 60% of the impressions are your target demographic. And then we look back at P30, where it's at 46% of your target impressions are of the total of the total impressions are your target adult 18 plus impressions. So of the million impressions, 46% is 471,000, and it is the lowest in terms of target percent comp, but that doesn't necessarily make it the worst. This is just so that we better understand this unit, and we understand that where the impressions are going.
And that's an important thing, you know, and again, a lot of in these sessions, definitely trying to give you rules of thumbs and a rule of thumb for a lot of things, and just ways to think about things. And whenever I think of target comp, you know, I think of efficiency, right? How efficient is that unit in reaching the target that you're trying to reach? And again, there's no right or wrong answer. P30 could be what you need for your campaign. It's just, again, another way to look at the inventory that you're considering and adding to a plan or considering in a plan, right? Because again, maybe some units may have overall fewer impressions that they're generating, but they may be really great at reaching your target audience, like P20, for example. Again, it's maybe generating fewer impressions overall, but there's also a lot less waste in terms of impressions going to people that the campaign may not be relevant for or targeted to. And maybe I'm stealing a little bit of Brian's thunder with this example here, but sorry, just wanted to add that point.
No, that's very helpful. Thank you. And then this just displays the 3 highest target percent comps, P20, 50, and 60. And those are all above 60%. And yes, these are, you know, yes, there's only 46,000 impressions to your target. But, you know, if you add up 20, 50, and 60, you know, you'll get, you know, over approximately 200.
And again, like I was saying earlier, it really plays into the overall aspect of the campaign planning and the reality of when you're planning. Maybe that unit, that P30, is more expensive because it's generating high, you know, more impressions overall. And again, it's really looking at and knowing that there's these different measures that you can use to help you look at and consider inventory. So again, here's just this more example of the equation itself. So sorry, I'll stop talking, Brian.
Yeah, no, this and this is the composition index. This is really understanding, you know, the relationship between target percent comp, and target percent population. So, you know, we just looked at the target percent comp, and, you know, so how do we know, you know, what that percentage? We're looking at different percentages. 60%, you know, is that a good number? And how do we know that? So our benchmark is the target percent target population. And that, you know, that's essentially what's going on in the marketplace. And the relationship between the target composition and target population gives us the comp index.
And we'll show you an example here that'll maybe help clarify it a little bit. Right?
Yeah, and we can just lay out these 2 examples. So, you know, for a target population, we see 35%. So in an example, we could just say 35% of the marketplace, of the DMA, are T-Mobile subscribers. And then this board is delivering impressions and has a target percent comp of 43%. So 43% of the impressions are going towards T-Mobile users. And that's great because it's more than what you would expect. It's 22% above average. We see that with the comp index of 122. That's essentially 43 divided by 35 gives us 122. In the second example, maybe 30% of the impressions are going towards T-Mobile users, and that results in an index of 86, a composition index of 86, and that would be 14% below.
And it's also important to know, and it kind of was in what Brian was saying, that when you're looking at an index, that number 100 is important. That's essentially the baseline. That's the average. So as you get above 100, it's over indexing, and as you get below, it's under indexing. And so that's why Brian is saying like the 122 is a good strong number because it's 22 times more, 22% above the 100 mark.
And yeah, and so the second board, 30%, it's not necessarily bad.
Right.
It could be 30% are towards T-Mobile users. Another 30% of that impressions could be towards Verizon users. So it's just to better understand your board, and you can put that story together.
Right. Also, again, it's some of those other factors that the overall impressions that it's generating is also another factor to consider. So again, it's not saying one unit is better or worse than the other. It's just which ones work better for your overall goals of the campaign.
And that brings us to, composition along with impressions, TRPs, reach can help select units to creatively meet the needs of advertisers.
Right. And I think just a quick example here to help reiterate that. And again, some of the stuff that we've been saying right along in this last part of the webinar. So if we're just looking at one metric, so we're looking at here, for example, your comp index, you're looking and you rank them in a certain order, you can see like, wow, that comp index is really great. That first one is 280, get the second one 144. These must be awesome boards. But as you kind of look and use other metrics in comparison and together as your overall kind of assessment of different units, you start to have another kind of layer of the story, right? So you start to look at the reach and the TRPs and just overall impressions. It helps you in that overall selection process. And maybe realistically, this unit that has the fourth best index is maybe the one that's really good because it's got a high reach, it's generating a high number of TRPs, and it's generating kind of a fair number of target impressions as well. And again, while it's under indexing, it's not under indexing tremendously. So again, just wanting to point out that there's a lot of different factors, and typically no one thing is the kind of only thing that you want to look at. It's really, if you can and have the ability to look at the variety of different aspects. And again, it's also all this is sitting under the overall goals of the campaign, the goals of the client, and how do these units help to meet that and meet the goals of any client that you're working with. So sorry, Brian.
Yeah. And this just brings us to the things to remember. Indexing tells us how much more likely a location's impressions are generated by a specific target audiences. It's only one element to evaluate. There's many, there's several that we've mentioned: TRPs, impressions, reach, as well as cost per million. Cost per thousand, CPMs, and then an ideal location. They will have a good comp index, and also high impressions against the target audience.
So there are some questions I want to pop back into. So one of them just kind of refers to, so what would be like a minimum threshold for a good composition index? Really, I would say anything over 100 would be considered good. I mean, again, 100 is an average, so maybe like 105 and above, but it really does depend for whatever the campaign is, and I guess how things in the area are doing comparatively. Because if you have a board that indexes at 105 and everything else in the area is at, you know, below 100, maybe 95, then that would be well above the rest of them. So really kind of anything. Oh, sorry,
Yeah.
Scott.
No, Brian, and to the same respect, to carry that out, you know, maybe all the units are under indexing, right? Maybe they're all 95 or lower. So it's like it is relative to what you're trying to do to the audience, you know. And sometimes, yeah, you know, maybe if a unit is in that last example, it was at 90%. Or 90, the index of 90, you know, and it's still close to average, right? And again, it's not just like I was saying earlier, any one thing. It's really trying to step back and look at comparatively, you know, because maybe 95, an index of 95 is great for the target audience and the set of units that you're looking at, because maybe that's the highest. Sorry, Brian.
No, that's good. So someone asked if we could go back to the slide that has the definition or the description of how indexing works or what indexing is. And then another question was, what is impression composition calculated against in the insights data? And really it's whatever your audience target is. So if you are just looking at the total population, then it's against person 0+, but if you've applied like an 18+ audience or 18 to 34, your impression composition is whatever that target impression is divided by that total impression.
Right. And that number that the target population is going to get divided into is the overall size of the market. So it would be probably 0+. Right. So if you're to get that target population, it'd be the size of the market divided by the target. If that makes sense.
Exactly. Yes. And if you're looking in the Insight Suite, just a heads up, it's listed as the comp index is listed as a target audience index, but when speaking through it, it's called the comp index, just in conversation. So listed as target audience index if you're looking for it in the Insight Suite.
Were there any other questions? Because I want to be respectful of everybody's time. I know we're right at the top of the hour. I do want to let everybody know if this was interesting and you want to go deeper, you can go to our learning lab, and the whole measurement fundamentals course has a little bit longer videos, one pagers, some presentation decks that were used to actually build each of the videos are all in there, and you can use all of those as well. Also, all that information is also available in our Geek Out library. So if you don't want to go through the whole course, if you just want to do a refresher video or grab a one-pager on reach and frequency, they're all in there as well. And then this webinar, as well as other webinars, are always available on our out-of-home office hours page on our Geek Out tab of our website. So you can see here, this is a screenshot of our website. So if you just go to Geek Out and scroll down, you'll go there, and it also has a link to our YouTube page, which has all of our past webinars there as well. But our 6 most recent are always right on the page itself. I do want to talk about our next session, which is going to kind of continue this measurement and methodology series of helping people understand what's going on with Geopath. And we're getting close to the release of our transit and scheduled fleets inventory into the Insight Suite. So we want to make sure, as that's happening, our members are aware of the methodology and then where to get that data once it's available in the Insight Suite. So while the inventory isn't in the Insight Suite just yet, we do want to make sure we're prepping everybody for that. So we're looking at March 31st for that session. So stay tuned for that. There'll be more communication about that, and more information in our newsletters just around transit and fleet overall, just so people are aware of what's happening with that. I know that's been something everyone's been waiting for a little bit now. So we're excited that that's nearing the point where we can release it. And we want to make sure we're supporting our members with that as well. And so, as always, though, you can also reach out to us at geekout@geopath.org. And we're happy to answer any questions. And if we didn't get to answer your question today, I just want to apologize. We're going to go through them, and we can reach out directly with any additional information on the questions you might have. But again, if you had a question or you think of a question after you leave this session, just email us at geekout@geopath.org, and we'll get you an answer. Brian, are there any other questions? Any quick questions that we can answer? I know we're just past the hour, but is there anything?
I think that was everything.
Okay. Again, just want to say thank you to everybody. Thank you for sticking with us through this session. Hopefully you found it useful and informative, and hopefully it helped, like I said. And if you do have questions, please feel free to reach out to us. So happy to do whatever we can to answer any questions, because this is important stuff for us as an industry. All right. Well,
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.